All right. All right. Welcome everyone back to GDC² Day 2. Our first speaker is Will Sords. He's been at Respawn Entertainment, Merge Conflict Studio, and Retro Studios. Let's get a round of applause for Will Sords.
Hi, I'm Will Sords, and I'm here to give a presentation on the team behind the audio that you hear in games and how there's a lot more that goes into the game audio process than just the creation of sound effects and music. Because while that is very important and it is primarily what you hear, there's so much more that goes into it, especially at a AAA level. So let's get into it. As I said, who am I? I'm Will Sords. As Zion mentioned, I've worked at Respawn Entertainment on Star Wars Jedi Survivor. I did an internship there right after Survivor launched, so it was a really cool internship where I got to do a lot of post-analysis on the game and learn how it was created, how a lot of things work, how the AAA process works, but I didn't have any of my work actually in the game. If you know the game Refresh, for any of you UT students, I was part of the team that developed that and then went on to co-found Merge Conflict Studio. And most recently, I was the Rumble designer and implementer on Metroid Prime 4 at Retro Studios. A little bit more about me for like the kind of games I like. I'm super enthused with games that have very tight combat action loops. Think of your FromSoft games, your modern Doom games, or games with heavy narrative cinematic elements to it. Your first-party Sony-style games, Expedition 33, I mean, everyone pretty much loves that game. Like, can't go wrong with it. And then I've been kind of in the games industry since about 2023. I've been bouldering, as you can see up there, since around 2022. I'm a huge bookworm. If you get me talking about Brandon Sanderson, I will not shut up. And then I'm a huge fan of modern metal music, so think of like Spirit Box or Lorna Shore or Darko US, anything like that. And then before I move on, I want to hear a little bit more about you guys. So in the audience, raise your hand if you want to work in game audio. Hey, some people, cool, let's go. That's what I was hoping for. Any designers? Cool, couple. Any artists? 3D, 2D, all of the above. Cool. Engineers? Yep. All right. And then producers. We would be all screwed without producers. Yeah, let's go, producers. Cool. So, I like audience participation, like improv theater background. What are some other roles other than like being a sound designer or a composer that you think of when you think of an audio team? Yeah. They said voice actor. Yeah, I mean, that's a lot more on the performance side of it, but it definitely is very involved in the audio process. Sir, right there? A Foley artist. Yes, let's go. Man in the back. Sound effects. Yep. All right. Yeah, those are definitely all great examples of what goes into AAA audio or just game audio in general. I'm going to go through a few of these. These are not necessarily always distinct roles, and it could be multiple roles wrapped up under a single title. This is not hard and fast definitions. I'm just trying to give you guys a little bit more insight into how much goes into audio in games. So, as we said, sound designers, composers, like these are some of the more self-explanatory stuff. The sound designer is making the sounds you hear, and that could be someone just working in a DAW, just creating sound effects through synthesis. We mentioned Foley artists. Those guys are guys and gals, are absolute wizards, being able to create realistic human movement. As you can see in this picture on the right, that's a guy doing some crazy Foley in what looks like a garage. If you've ever seen videos of Foley artists putting shoes on their hands of like one of each type of shoe and then doing a walk and talk picture scene, and they're just in a pit of sand just hitting the ground with their hands, like it's absolutely insane what those guys and gals can pull off. So you have your sounds and you have your music. You still need to get that into the game. In some places, that is the sound designer's job to put that in the game. Some places, the composer puts that in the game, or the composer hands it off to a sound designer to put in the game. Other studios, you have people whose job is solely putting the sounds in the game. Maybe your team is working with an outsourced studio like Formosa Interactive or Vicious Sounds, and their job is solely creating sound effects. They might not even see the game that they're making sound effects for. They could maybe just be getting clips or only just descriptions in a Jira. And they have to envision all of this in their head, make a sound, send it to the studio, get feedback on that sound, potentially do revisions, have this huge back and forth process, while the studio has implementers that are putting those sounds in the game. So this can be abstracted across so many different people if you really start breaking it down. If you look at some modern AAA credits, you can see some audio teams go up to like 70 people for something like God of War or other first-party Sony games. They've got massive teams behind them. And same thing goes for music. You can have a music implementer that's working with potentially a music lead, the composer themselves, their own audio director to implement that music in the game, because game music isn't just like a start to end track that you hear on a soundtrack on Spotify or vinyl or anything like that. It's broken up into much smaller sections that are able to be dynamically played through game systems, so the music is alive in the world that you're engaging with. You can have a little trigger volume that the player walks into, and then they just hear like a little stinger of music. That's a term we use, as a stinger. Or you're in a boss fight that has different music for different stages of health of that boss, and you want it to naturally flow between the different sections of music without it being completely broken up and like breaking the rules of music, of trying to transition when you're in the middle of a measure or something like that. You really have to take care of building your systems to follow musically how you want all of these transitions to go. So a lot of work goes into just putting music in a game. Next, we said voice actors. There's a whole dialogue team in a lot of cases, and they handle everything from working with the talent to editing the takes of that to implementing that in the game. You have to localize that if you're doing voice acting and trying to get into multiple different languages. So the dialogue team is potentially doing all of this work 7, 8, 9, 10 times, depending on how many languages you're working in. And you can think of the dialogue team as a bit of a bridge between the narrative department and the audio department. They're usually interfacing pretty heavily with narrative in a lot of cases. Looking at some other parts of it, you have to mix the game, because if you don't mix a game, it's probably going to sound pretty bad. If your music is so loud you can't hear a boss, or your character is so quiet that you don't know when you're doing a thing, like all of those sounds inform the player of the actions that they're taking and things that are happening in the world. So if your game mix is bad, your audience is going to think your game sounds bad, even if individual parts of your game or even every sound in your game is objectively good. If it's mixed badly, it's going to sound bad. And so a lot of the time, this is most likely handled by your audio director, will probably be mixing the game, but not always. You could have a dedicated person on your audio team that just handles the mix. Really depends on the size and scope of your audio team. And then, of course, as I said, an audio director who most likely will be establishing the sonic identity of the game. They're also managing the entire audio team, potentially managing outsourcers, doing budgets, paying people. When you're in the management, your time generally starts going more management and less hands-on with the discipline that you're working in. So you might not even get to make a sound anymore because you're just having to be a director and you're in meetings all days. And then, oh, the workday's over and I still got to mix the game. Damn. But all of that is made so much easier if you have producers. As I said before, producers are the lifeblood of any large team. If you don't have a good producer, you're probably falling behind and having to cut content and getting in trouble because your estimates are off. And audio is at the end of the pipeline when it comes to game dev. Anything that happens upstream from us will always tumble down to audio. If your VFX artist decides, oh, I want to add an extra explosion sparkle thing on this one thing, well, now we need to hear that. So that's a new asset that needs to be made. How many variations of that asset? This one rogue sparkle could be like $1,000 worth of productivity hours. And if that's not communicated, that's a pain in the ass. Like, it can make life really hard. So having a good production staff will make everything easier. And especially for audio producers, if they know the audio process, it makes life even easier because audio kind of has its own language. Like, artists and design kind of have a lot of shared language. Design and engineering have a lot of shared language. No one shares language with audio. We're just kind of off in our own world doing our own things. And then you just come along and go, oh, the game sounds good. Cool, thanks, audio. But it's kind of true in a lot of ways. You can see this also with how, I mean, every discipline can be outsourced, but audio is one of the most heavily outsourced disciplines. Rest in peace, Blue Point Studios here in Austin. They unfortunately recently got closed, but they didn't even have an audio team on staff. That was all handled externally. Like, a lot of studios do outsource a lot of that work. So being able to have production that understands how all of this works will make everything flow easier. And last but not least, kind of stuff that I'm more familiar with. You have tech audio, which can be so many different things, and we'll get to that in a second. But a lot of people will consider tech audio as tech designers that are making audio systems in more of a scripting language. Think for Unreal, probably you're doing it in a visual scripting language like Blueprints. And then they make a horrible nightmare mess, and then they pass it off to audio programming or your audio engineer and say, hey, this works, but it sucks. Make it good, please. And then so your engineers will come in and do all of that crazy work for you and make it performant and just clean everything up from your spaghetti code of wires and nodes. And so speaking of audio programmers, they're generally part of the engineering team and not the audio team, but it really depends on like what studio you're at and how they divvy up all of this work. But they are predominantly working in like C++ or your lower level language in the core engine and core audio engine and doing their work there, while tech audio is probably most likely working in a layer above that in your visual scripting and designer scripting languages and all that stuff. And then haptics. So that's kind of what I have a lot of experience with. So we'll get to that in the second half of this presentation. But controllers go burr. And for a long time, that was predominantly handled by design. But with PlayStation 5 and Switch HD Rumble, that responsibility started to go more into the hands of the audio team, because vibrations, sound is vibrations. So a lot of shared language and philosophy between those two things, which allows the audio team to do really cool things with controller haptics. So I mentioned tech audio. Anyone in the audience want to try and give a definition of what tech audio is? Go for it. That could fall to a technical sound designer. Hearing things through a controller, sometimes that could be done through haptics, which could be a realm of tech audio. But a lot of the time for like the PlayStation controller, all you really do is just tell the controller what sound to play through your audio engine. So yeah, nothing wrong with that answer, but not quite. Anyone else want to try and give a shot? Yeah.
Is it like taking the audio files and stuff and transposing it into the game engine or the game software?
Potentially, yeah. That would be falling into like sound implementation would be that. Whoops. There isn't one definition. It's pretty much like if you go to someone and say, hey, what's a tech artist? No one can answer that because every studio has their own definition for it. Yeah, I've worked at a couple of places, and the responsibility of what a technical sound designer was completely different between those two studios. And so no one really knows what we do, so we do everything. So let's take a look at a few examples of what could be considered tech audio. We said audio implementation. That could be done through animation tagging. That's how a lot of Foley-based systems are done. Weapon movements are probably done in animations. Vocalizations when you jump and land and things like that. You all tag that in the animation to say, hey, when this part of the animation is reached, play this sound file. Or you're putting emitters. That's what we call the game objects that emit sound. You're putting emitters in the world that you want to hear your birds chirping in the trees, your winds rustling, or interactable sounds like you go blow up a rock. Well, you want to hear the debris from that rock shattering and things like that. So that would be more of your audio implementation. And then you could do complex system design for audio systems. Think if you have a really cinematic and realistic narrative game, and you want to create this super complex, like realistic breathing simulation system for your player character. Or you don't want to have static emitters in the world. So you're walking through the trees, and every time you hear a bird chirp, it's only from this one location above you. You want that bird chirp to randomly spawn in the forest. So there has to be tech behind that system to be able to do all of these cool things. So that's probably going to be handled by your technical sound designers. Question in the audience. She said you're connecting audio to assets of your game. Yes. I mean, yeah, you are. Like, you're propagating the audio in the game, but that can be done to so many different degrees of fidelity. Whether it's just, yes, we hear wind, and no matter where you are, you just have a stereo file playing that follows the player around, or it's just only playing back in stereo. Or you have a really complex system that if you're moving through a canyon, it changes out the wind that you're hearing because it's a narrower geometry, and that makes the wind more high-pitched. And then you get to the open field, and it spreads out more and things like that. There's so much depth that is possible with audio, but that requires more time, more budget, more resources. And so you're kind of just opening Pandora's box with how realistic do you want your audio to sound? Which, speaking of those kinds of things, your tech audio people could be doing reverb tagging and making spatial audio systems, because if your audio doesn't propagate through the world following the laws of physics, it sounds very uncanny to the player. If you're standing in this area back here, and you just hear a sound that's playing in this hallway completely phase through all of these walls, you're going to be thinking like you're crazy, because that just can't happen. So the sound needs to know how it can route through this hallway, through this portal, through this other portal, and then back to where the player is standing. And that will allow it to sound like it is around this U there. And so we do that in most cases using systems called rooms and portals, where you're using audio volumes to say, hey, this is the defined geometry of a space. Sound lives in here. It can go out in all directions. And if it hits an edge of this volume, it bounces off of that, because that's how reflections in the real world work. And then we use a thing called a portal to create an opening between two volumes that allows sound to transmit through that portal. And then you can open those and you can close those, kind of like you can with a door. And doing this is very tedious and time-consuming, which means it's expensive for your budget. So instead of having one person do this the entire time, oh, I hope this works. Haha, yes. You can create an entire tool that does it for you. So this is a tool called Volumator from Rob Blake that says, oh, you have all of this geometry. Well, let's just analyze all of it and start building these volumes for you. And it's a really cool tool. You can check out this Audiokinetic blog if you want. But it has these drones that fly through the map and scan your environment and give you different options of these volumes it can make. And it does it in like a minute or something like that, compared to taking hours, days to do this all by hand. So being able to build systems like that is really, really cool and helpful, and saves you time and money and unlocks your designers to spend more time making sick wubs, because that's what sound designers really want to do, is just make sick wubs and not be working in engines most of the time. And then another thing that could be considered tech audio is doing audio pipeline improvements for your sound designers. Because as I said, they just want to be making sick wubs. They don't want to be spending hours renaming all of their sound assets and then exporting them to a folder and then importing them into their audio middleware and then assigning it to where it needs to go into their middleware's hierarchy and all of this stuff. That's really frustrating. Why would you want to do that when there's a tool that you can use that just does all of that work for you that someone made? So that could be a tech audio designer's, tech sound designer's responsibility, is making these tools and these scripts. Because one of the main digital audio workstations you use in game audio is Reaper. It's free in the way that WinRAR is free, but also it's just one of the cheapest DAWs that you can get. It's only like $60 for a license compared to like 1,000 or something for Ableton. And it's super cool because you can script in Reaper and automate so many things. You can write in Lua or Python. Super cool stuff. And these are just a couple of examples. So this is the Audiokinetic they always say something because it's Reaper and the system's called Rescript. So this is their plugin Rewise that allows you to just render things directly into your Wise project. Anyone in the audience know what I mean when I say Wise? Okay, Wise is a tool we'll look at in a second. It's an audio middleware engine, which is essentially an audio engine that lets you process all of your audio in a tool that is separate from your game engine. Because who's used Unity's native audio engine? Who likes Unity's native audio engine? Yeah, that's why we use Wise. Or Fmod, or a proprietary one if you're at like EA. They have Frostbite that has it built in and things like that. So yeah, these are just some things that technical sound designers do, and I think that stuff's pretty cool. So, whoa, that wasn't supposed to happen. We're gonna go back a bunch. Woo! Okay, so I want to look at some examples of this, and this wasn't working if I played it in here. Does it work if I go outside of it? Cool. Okay. So this video I'm about to show you is from Ghosts of Yote. I had mentioned a system that procedurally spawns emitters in the world for ambient audio. So I was at Game SoundCon this past October and got to see the Ghosts of Yote tech talk given by Reverend Dr. Bradley D. Meyer. Crazy title, but also a super cool guy. And they built an audio propagation system that removed the need, for the most part, to hand place audio emitters in the world for things like bushes rattling in the wind, walla, which is just like ambient chatter noise and crowds. If your blacksmiths are hitting their hammers and their anvils, if you're walking in a building and hearing creaks in the ceiling above you, if it was a static emitter, it would only be in this one location. But they made a system that uses volumes and tagging of world objects to be able to dynamically spawn sound emitters at runtime. So they have a volume over a village, and they have this area above me tagged as a ceiling. Well, because this is tagged as a ceiling and it's in this village volume says, here's 10 sounds that can be wood creaks. And then they go, okay, this is a ceiling that wood creaks can spawn on. Well, anywhere on this XY plane, when the player is nearby, just spawn a sound of these 10 selected wood creaks. And it could spawn over there, or it could spawn over there, or it could spawn above the player. But because it's not in one static location, it allows the world to feel so much more alive, because it's not static, it is dynamic. And the world that we live in today is dynamic. So this is just a quick like 10, 15 seconds of just hearing wood creaks kind of anywhere in the stereo field. I just grabbed all of these from YouTube, so they're not the best examples, but pretend it sounds really cool. Yeah, so as the player moved through the building, it wasn't just one static location that they were hearing all of these reeds knocking together, the wood creaking and stuff like that. I think this stuff is really cool. Then let me get back to the presentation. Wow. Cool. Okay. Next one I have to show you is from God of War Ragnarok. Anyone in the audience play that game? Yeah, we got a couple. How many of you guys remember the fun aqueduct puzzles? Most people probably didn't like them, but they have some really cool audio tech to them. So water is actually kind of hard to get feeling realistic. It needs to have the perception of constant motion when it's flowing, but you can't have motion necessarily all the time because the player is controlled. So it can be going anywhere, and you want to hear the motion of the water, but you don't want to have the water cut out on you by providing that motion to it. So they made a pretty cool system that for these aqueducts that allows the water to be rerouted based on how the player is interacting with these aqueducts. And it's handled pretty flawlessly, in my opinion, of just being able to change the location of where this water is flowing and not have any weird stutters or jumps in their audio. And it just really opens up the stereo field in cool ways. So this clip, it's a really short one, a Atreus, the kid, is going to shoot a rock in the aqueduct, which will explode the water out to the left, really opening up that stereo field. And then Kratos is going to throw his axe in the middle of the aqueduct, breaking it, rerouting the water, and have it come directly at the player. So we can hear that real quick.
Look, there's a door just across this gap. Tyr could be right there.
How well does that translate over the speakers in here, by the way? It sounds really good on my headphones, but, I mean, we're in an auditorium, so, Okay, well, cool. I tried. Go watch these on YouTube. They're cool. They're cool. Trust me. And then the last example I wanted to show you from a video real quick was from The Last of Us. This is a talk that was given at GDC 2023 from Bo Anthony Jimenez and Jesse James Garcia. And this was actually the GDC talk that made me want to become a technical sound designer for my first GDC that I went to. They created a very incredibly detailed and realistic breathing system that immerses the player and grounds them as the character that they're playing. It uses a floating point variable that they called heart rate, and based on the state that the player's in, it allows this variable to go to different strengths, which controls a looping breathing system that they created for the character. So if you're sprinting, you're breathing harder and your heart rate's going up more, which makes it louder. And then if your heart rate gets too high, you get exhausted, which makes the character breathe really deeply. And I'm not going to show the whole video because it goes into so much more. But they accounted for one of the characters in The Last of Us having vertigo, that if they got too close when they were too high in the air to the edge of like a building and could look over it, they started adding this like hyperventilating panics layer to her breathing. And wrapping it all up into, oh my gosh, this is so cool stuff, is the audio engine that they use at Naughty Dog is Sony's engine called Scream, which allows for sound designers to script directly in their audio engine, which allowed them to drive the 3D characters' facial animations from the sounds of the breathing. So instead of trying to have actors match predefined animations, they're just morphing the character's face at runtime based on the sound inputs that are going through the player, which I thought is like super cool. So this is just a little quick example of that heart rate in action of Ellie going from like a combat to sprinting to exhausted. Oh, helps if I click the right thing. Yeah, little cool thing there. And so now, if it loads, I want to show you my attempt at recreating that system, because, as I said, it's what made me want to become a technical sound designer. So since my contract at Retro ended, I took a little bit of a break away from game dev just to have some free time for once. And so for the past couple weeks, I've been trying to get back into learning Unreal since I was working in custom tools at Retro, and I've never really dabbled much with UE5. So I decided, hey, what better way than try and recreate the system that inspired me a bunch? So I'm pull that up right now. Okay. And then let me go back to here, get out of full screen real quick. Haha, cool. How many people in the audience are familiar with Unreal, by the way? Cool. How many are like strictly Unity? Okay, yeah, about what I expected. Nothing wrong with either engine. They each have their own strengths and weaknesses, yada, yada, yada. So one thing that is one of those strengths of Unreal is you have a designer forward scripting system called Blueprints that you're able to work with. Instead of me having to break open VS Code, Writer, Visual Studio, anything like that, if I want to do any kind of scripting or coding like I would in Unity, I just get to go in here and type branch, and this is an if statement, and I can put a Boolean condition here. If it's true, execute this flow of logic. If it's false, execute that flow of logic. Pretty similar to how most visual scripting systems work. I think most people would consider Unreal kind of the gold standard right now, but it's a game engine. They all do game engine things. Some things are better at some things are worse at others. So let me, actually, I want to play it like this. Okay. So here we are. And as I said before, here is my middleware Wise. It's very scary if you don't know what it is. And if you do know what it is, it still is pretty scary. So I'm going to solo these right now. Just cut out the ambient wind. And helps if I connect to my editor. Cool. Okay. So as I said, I attempted to recreate this. Let me see. I did some prep work for this, but audio loves to break constantly for no reason. So I recorded myself for all of these assets. I am not a voice actor. I am not an animator. This is mostly for like the tech creating the breathing system and not like how good the system itself is for how it sounds. I'm not a voice actor, so I apologize. But I created a system that, as I said, is trying to be like The Last of Us. So I have a bunch of different states that the player can be in. Right now, we're in an idle state. And so we can look at this in Blueprints, where if we go into my breathing system, we have this whole flowchart of logic that is running. I took it out of update or tick because we don't need to be running this every frame. And so this is a system that's being checked about every 0.05 seconds. So still pretty quickly, but more performance since it's not happening every frame. And so first I monitor for any kind of movement from the player. And then we'll set it to idle based on that. And then have a bunch of different branching logic for if I'm forcing a state, if the player is exhausted, if the player is in stealth, if they're in combat, if they're sprinting, or just exploring around the world. And looking at like one of these real quick, it's just a whole bunch of floats that are being set and being told an enum system to go, hey, we're in this state based on these inputs from the player. Hey, because we're in this state, we need to increase our heart rate. Or, oh, we're not in this state anymore. Let's decrease our heart rate. And all of this is just running constantly in the background. And then it works with an animation system. Again, I'm not an animator. I just kind of threw all this together real quick to say, oh, you are jumping. Hey, let's interrupt our breathing system for a second because we need to make a grunt when we jump or a grunt when we land or take damage. And then all of this is set up to be able to take in, oh, we're making a new sound. Let's stop our breathing system, then resume it after a set amount of time based on what animation is playing. I can go into more depth later in the day. I'll be hanging around all day to talk about this stuff if anyone wants to hear about it. But let's actually see it in action a little bit. So we have this event that is always playing called our breath loop that, as I said, can take all of these different states that the player is in and switch to a bunch of different options. So we can be in stealth or stealth combat and all of these things. And then we also have these inside switches that can take in, oh, is the player healthy, injured, severely injured, and be dynamically switching all of these assets out constantly. And so let's get this back. Hopefully we can hear this. Uh-oh. Yeah, as I said, I'm not a voice actor. Can you hear a little bit of panting? Damn.
Oh, there's a gas.
Yeah. Exhausted is the loudest one. Let me try getting into an injured state. I think that's louder. All right, let me just go crazy with this real quick. Oh, am I overwriting all of that? Okay. Well, this isn't going as well as I hoped it would. Oh, come on. Ah, shit. I don't ever do this on my laptop. Ah, fuck. Let me try this again. Let's go down to super injured. Damn. Oh, I promise this works. This is not going as well as I hoped it would. Well, okay, that's a failure. All right, well, we'll move on from that. I tried. I'll be, again, totally down to talk to people about it whenever, but it's pretty cool, and I'm going to write all this up for a blog post on my website later if anyone would have any interest in hearing about it more and actually hearing it. Let me close out of this. Okay. No. Well, Unreal demo failed. Let's try again. Let's talk about haptics for the next 15 minutes. I think haptics are really, really cool because, can I full screen this? Hello. Oh, helps if I hit the right button. Cool. Yeah, haptics are cool. I view haptics as creating an immersive player experience while unlocking a new human sense to interface with. We've had sight and sound since video games have been around, and we started to get touch back even with like the N64 and having those bolt-on rumble pack editions that you could get. But with first the Switch and the creation of HD Rumble, and more predominantly the PlayStation 5 controller, this DualSense right here, we've gotten into a more high fidelity age of haptics, which really allows players to use their hands and the sense of touch to engage with the game that they're playing. And it can be used, if done well and with a lot of creativity, it can really elevate the player experience, in my opinion. So let's talk rumble versus haptics. Anyone want to try and give a definition of the difference between the two? Yeah, you in the back. So he said the rumble is the motor that shakes the entire controller, and haptics are more for the resistive triggers. I'll give you the rumble. Yeah, rumble is motors that spin. I would say resistive triggers are part of the haptic experience, but haptics just means also vibration and rumble. But where we designate between rumble versus haptics is how the technology works. So when we would say rumble, we're probably more talking about like the Xbox controller, a DualShock 4. Switch is a complicated one, but it is using the traditional type of rumble, which is a weighted offset motor. And so for the longest time with those weighted offset motors, you had off, low, high, and that was it. You couldn't control anything else. And so you could control the strength of it and how long it goes burr for. And that was controlled predominantly by the design department for the most case, because it interfaced with a lot of the systems that they would be creating. It was just done through gameplay systems. But with haptics and what we would call modern haptics in controllers, those are done with linear resonant actuators, which is still a motor that still makes vibrations, but it's at a much higher fidelity. And instead of thinking of it as a motor, in my opinion, it's a lot easier to think of it as just a miniature speaker. Because what is a speaker but a membrane that moves back and forth to create vibrations in the air that your ears turn into sounds? And so rumble and haptics are just vibrations still. Yeah, question in the back. So he said, is that why haptics are able to be felt in more specific areas versus rumble being more just like a holistic experience? No, not necessarily. It's more so that you're given a lot more fidelity and control over what you're able to accomplish with the controller because of that. Because we're not stuck to just low, high, off in a duration, we're able to, as sound designers, essentially create sounds that you feel in the controller. And a little kind of rule of thumb that I like to say when I'm talking about haptics is a good sound that you hear feels really bad in your hands. And something that feels really good in your hands sounds really bad to the player. And so, yeah, I'll skip a couple of slides to get to that. Because like some fundamentals of how haptics work is now with the PlayStation controller, they're generated by audio, and you can think of them as an extension of the audio experience, and it's creating that physical experience for the players to interface with. And so, as I said, these are my wonderful little drawings of trying to represent what a linear actuator is inside of a controller, and it's just these little motors in each handle that spin like a motor, but it creates, it's done at fidelities that allow you to have so much more control over it. And one of the ways we're able to do that is because this PlayStation controller is treated as a 4-channel audio device. You have kind of, if you think of it like your front left and your front right outputs are the speaker that comes out of the center of the controller, which some games are able to use to accentuate cool little moments. In Jedi Survivor, if you heal with your droid, you'll get a little chirp out of the controller. In Final Fantasy 16, if you hit a perfect combo follow-up, you hear a little magic spark out of your controller. In God of War Ragnarok, when you're on your sled in the open world zone and you're rattling the chains for the sled dog, that's coming out of the controller. And then your channels 3 and channels 4 of the controller are your linear actuators. So you can just plug your controller into your computer, open up a digital audio workstation, and start designing haptics for your controller, just with a synthesizer, with a noise generator, with putting sound as a channel 3 and 4 output in here. And that's kind of why I said that good sounds feel bad and good haptics sound bad, is because while you can think of it like a speaker, it doesn't have the full representation of what the human hearing can hear. Wow, such great English. But so the human response to sound, you can hear from as low as about 20 hertz all the way up to about 20,000 hertz or 20 kilohertz. This controller goes about as low as 20 or 40 hertz, but it only goes up to 600, 700 hertz tops. So you have a much more limited window in what you can design to, and that drives a lot of innovation because of that constraint. But also that means because you have so much limited space to work with, if you try and put a good sound in there, there's just too much information for the controller to know what to do with. What makes haptics feel good to the player is very defined, controlled, essentially just like bursts that are like, something has happened. I know why this is happening. I can point to it with what I'm seeing and what I'm hearing, and what I'm feeling is just reinforcing that. And that kind of gets into some of our haptic pillars of you want it to enhance your immersion. It's allowing for exaggerated feedback, additive experimental feedback, and what I think is really cool is it allows for accessibility for more players as well. So if we take a look at some of these pillars, that enhanced immersion. What does it feel like to play as this character? What does it feel like to be a Jedi? What does it feel like to be a space bounty hunter? What does it feel like to be Spider-Man? And so you can add haptics to all of these things. When you're jumping around, when you're landing, when you're swinging through the air, you can drive all of that through the controller. So if you're swinging with your right hand, well, you feel the tension and the pull of your web or your grappling hook on the right side of the controller. If you're using like your left hand for some weird force powers or space magic stuff, you're driving like weird flowy sine waves that are offset from each other to create a beating effect in the controller because of how sound math works. And you can just feel that through that hand almost. If you're Kratos, one of the grounding rules that they had for the haptics on God of War Ragnarok was if Kratos' hands are touching something, you feel it in the controller. But if he's not interacting with something, you don't feel anything from the controller. So that grounds the player into feeling like they're the ones that are Kratos. Their actions are what Kratos is taking. Environments, like you have a big vault door open in front of you, and it's like this gritty stone door, and you feel that tension in the controller slowly ease as it opens. Or you blow up a big rock over there, and you feel the explosion, and then little plinks of debris go across the controller. Enemy haptics of someone rolling a grenade at you, and you can feel a tink, tink, boom in the controller, or an enemy spawns behind you and you get like a little warning, like zit feeling in your controller. Like those are all ways to enhance the immersion of the player and also communicate things to them. Looking at some exaggerated feedback that you could do. I mentioned like Kratos in his hands, like you have cinematics where he, like the very first one in the opening of God of War, where he's swinging his axe into the tree. Imagine every time that axe hit the tree, you felt it reverberate in the controller. Imagine that be your first moment with a game. That would really suck you in right there. You're in a spaceship dogfight, and you're having all of the ships around you explode, and it's like, you see this explosion over there, and it's a little small in the controller, and then this one over here is closer, and it feels like it's closer in the controller. That would make you feel like you're in the pilot seat of your craft, and like, oh no, am I going to be hit? Is my entire controller about to just go crazy because I'm dying now? Sweet spots and timed responses for doing like quick time events in games. That it's really nice where if you nail that perfectly, you feel that. Or adding that extra pizzazz to finishing a combo in combat. Experimental feedback, feeling like the nuances of riding a horse or driving a motorcycle and feeling it skid out from under you or go over bumps and things like that. You can build an entire vocabulary through the sensations that the player feels in the controller, so they can build that touch context association. We do that with things we hear. We do that with things we see. Why can't we do that with things we feel? And then like some other, like maybe not audio focused things, like you're in a low health state as a player, and then you start feeling like a little heartbeat in your controller. That's pretty cool. Yeah. And then accessibility, what I really like about it. For players that are potentially of hard of hearing or have hard of sight, and so they're not able to interface with games that someone who does have those senses are able to do. Well, touch is another way we can communicate with those players. If they can't see that they're walking into a wall, you can give them some bumps in the controller to know that, hey, we're running into something. You can't move around it. But if they back up, those bumps go away. If you're navigating a menu, knowing that they've reached the bottom of a list or what they're trying to confirm doesn't allow them to confirm and you error out, you can feel all of those things in your hand. You can guide players to hidden locations through like subtle pulses in the controller if you have little hidden collectibles around or things like that. I really like haptics. It's, I think, an underrepresented part of audio and games, but in the past few years, people have started to talk about it more, and I just like taking the opportunity when I can to discuss these things. We only have about 2 minutes left, and I was supposed to have a demo, but haptics are kind of a hard thing to demo. So since we only have a little bit of time left, I'm going to refrain from doing that right now. I'll be out in the atrium for a few hours today. I'm actually flying to the Game Developers Conference tonight, so I'm just going to be chilling here until my flight. If anyone wants to come up and mess around with a little demo I made, feel free to come up and chat to me about it. But for the last minute or so we have, does anyone have any questions? Yeah.
How do you show off? It's like a
So he asked, how would I show off my work if I'm applying to a new job? Yeah, for haptics, that's really hard. The best I can say is you just need to get them to play the game. I'm very fortunate that my credit is for a pretty widely acclaimed game, so it's a lot easier to convince someone to say, like, oh, go play the new Metroid game, because there hasn't been one in almost 20 years. That's a lot easier of a sell than, hey, go play my indie game that you have to play with this specific controller on this specific platform so you can feel at this one specific part something that I made go burr. That's a lot harder of a sell, but your work with controller haptics should speak for itself in most cases. And so when you're applying and looking for line items on your resume, talk about how you worked with the team, how you met your deadlines. Did you lead people? Did you maintain a cohesive vision for what our aesthetic is across a game? Talk about the things that your work isn't able to say, and then let your work speak for itself. Yeah, of course. Other questions? Yeah.
So it's basically communicating that the player that's playing the character is the character. So like their attacks give out like rumbles and stuff. The enemy basically is like throwing a grenade and so it explodes by you and you can feel that because you're the character.
Question was, do haptics essentially make you feel like you are the character based on the actions that you're taking and things happening in the world around you? It depends on what your goal of the project is, but to me, that's what my goal would be on a project that I worked on, is I am embodying this character. I am the pilot on the sticks. So anything that I feel in my hands is because the character is feeling it. Now, that might not always be the correct solution for the project that you're on, but if that is the type of project you're creating, that would be my philosophy when if I'm working on it, is making sure that the controller feels like an extension of what the player is feeling. Cool. Any other questions? Yeah, one over there. So you have, so the question is, how do you differentiate between different things that you're feeling in the controller? You have that control as well. Like, as I said, this is 2 speakers. I can control how strong or soft it is. I can control the frequency that it is. So the pitch of it. Is this a really deep, bodied, powerful rumble in my hand? Or is it a very quiet, light one and little tip taps of maybe like rain falling on an umbrella over you? Or is it a big explosion shaking you? That being able to differentiate between those things comes down to that haptic vocabulary that I said, like establishing to the player, if I feel this thing, I have an association for what that might be. That could be like static electricity in the world, magical powers, explosions, different elements that you're walking on. Am I walking on concrete? Am I walking on glass? It all comes back to the type of project you're working on and how you structure a lot of those things. Because it's audio, this is getting like kind of technical, but you can sidechain those things. So if you're having all of these like more player character combat things happening of, I'm shooting my gun, pew, 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 this is constantly happening. This one might be a little bit of a weaker one since it's always playing if you're in a FPS type of game. And then you feel this like big explosion attack from a boss. Well, this one is way more important to what's happening right now. This little pew pew, get that out of the way. We don't care about that until this moment is over. So it comes down to mixing, essentially. Like it's like audio, mix it like it's audio. Cool. Any other questions? Last one.
So I know that haptics and rumble is mostly done in the games industry, but I would wager that it's also pretty applicable to other industries as well. Like, for example, like mobile devices probably have a lot of rumble. Do you find that like this the skill sets that you make with like those like haptic and rumble engineering is like very applicable to those other industries, or is it very localized in games?
The question is, haptics and rumble for games, do the skills required to perform that job translate to other industries where there is haptic content? I haven't worked in any of those, if I'm going to be honest. A lot of the fundamentals of sound and vibration probably would translate. But the methods of how you create those are probably very different. Like, I'm not plugging my iPhone into Reaper and opening up a synthesizer and playing notes on this MIDI keyboard and feeling the rumbles on my phone. But I can do that with this controller. So I don't know how you would even start that process of authoring for mobile, or a haptic vest for VR, or 4D chairs in a movie theater, or things like that. They all use a lot of the same fundamental stuff, but I'm not familiar with how I would go about working in those other fields. So hope that helps.
Thanks.
Cool. Well, thank you so much for allowing me to stand up here and talk to you about audio things for a while. I know it's not always the most applicable stuff, but I think this is really cool. There's so much that goes into audio behind games, and yeah, thank you.